Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We're in the week of Menachem, the yahrzeit of the Rebbe's father. We'll do the mimer from 40 years ago, the Shabbos following Chof, Shabbos Parshas Ekev, which that year was Mevarchim Chodesh Elul, because Rosh Chodesh was Shabbos. This year it's going to be Sunday, it'll be different. Also, we are in the same period of time, as we've spoken the last several mamorim, of the time that there was in Lubavitcher the issue of the quote-unquote referendum on the legitimacy of Lubavitcher and of Chassidic, etc. at that time. And the mamorim each have a little nuance of this idea. Additionally, this mimer, maybe you could say it's complex in its simplicity and it's simple in its complexity. But it's an interesting way, in a certain way of the Rebbe's teaching, where the Rebbe draws the similarity in several things, especially in the three ideas of the three, the connections, which are connected as the Rebbe has done many times, and some of the concepts we've discussed in other mamorim. Vehaya, Ekev, Tishme'un, Esa mishpatim ha'ela. Ushmartem v'asisam v'som v'shomer v'ayela kecha l'chos abris v'sech chesed asher nishpala v'secha. So the beginning of the parsha begins that it will be due to your keeping, hearing, and we're going to discuss this word Tishme'un, listening to and obeying these judgments, statutes, mitzvahs, and you will keep them and you'll do them, and the Lord your God will keep you, guard you, the covenant and the kindness that he swore to your forefathers. Which includes coming into the Holy Land and taking over the Holy Land and all the good things which are enumerated in the Parsha subsequently. And in the Maimer that of the Tzemach Tzedek, which is printed in Oir HaTorah. Now the Rebbe says something parenthetically. The way that the Maimer is set out, you could really tell that it's a discourse of the Alter Rebbe, but with the notations and explanations of the Tzemach Tzedek. And really, this is evident from towards the end of this Maimer. In Behago B'Chatzo Yigel, there is a notation in parentheses, Amashakosov Lifnei Hamusker, and something which it says before, but in other words, before this parenthesis, he's talking about what it says earlier in the Maimer, V'Tzorach in Kavanose. We have to really understand his intent here, meaning that Tzemach Tzedek talking about his grandfather, the Alter Rebbe's intent, which means it's a mimer of the Alter Rebbe, which the Tzemach Tzedek then adds his notations and he elucidates and explains. From this we can prove and discern that the main part of the mimer of that discourse is not the Tzemach Tzedek's, but it's of the Alter Rebbe. Okay. The tzorich lahavin. Now, what does it say in the mimer there? The tzorich lahavin loshen Ekev. First of all, we have to understand what is this term, Ekev. Ekev, which I translated earlier as due to, D-U-E, or on account of. So it literally means a heel. Ekev is the heel, which is the bottom of the body, but wherever it goes, the rest of the body is there. Umevayer bozeh dehine yedua pirushay shuini nagbaim dahainu beikvis mashicha. So he explains that it's one of that we know the explanation that it is the idea of the heels, and we also have heels in time. So the heels of Mashiach, meaning the end of the Golos, the right here at the bottom, at the time Mashiach comes, Soif Kol Dargin, it's the end of all the levels at that time. Tishme'un vadai, then you'll finally hear, listen, obey. Certainly. Kiim le'ach shavemosai, because if not now, when? It's already at the end of the golus, the end of the exile. It's time to do it. Hulu. And the Rebbe says, and they have here in the Yiddish, there's no more time to delay it. You can't put it off any further. This is it. It's tea time. At the time of the heels of Mashiach, we'll have all the fulfillment of all the Torah and the mitzvahs. And this will bring the reward which is enumerated and explained afterwards. Now, the way it works in serving God through Torah mitzvahs, comes the person serves with his soul. The soul has what's called garments. The garments are how a person expresses themselves, which is thought, speech, and deed. And he explains in the continuation of the Maimer there, in the Torah of the Alter Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek. That in this verse we have these three ideas of thought, speech, and deed in detail in the pasuk that begins this mimer. Here it goes. The inyan Tishme'un. It says it'll be when you hear. Hu b'chinas machshava. That's the idea of thought. Ki shemeya, the word that somebody hears. Hu miloshin, and this is from the verse in Samuel. Daber ki shemeya avdecha. Speak because your servant hears. Meaning I'm listening, I'm hearkening, I'm concentrating, and I'm paying attention. That's all what that hearing means there. So therefore it means inyan havona umachshova. That's the idea of understanding and thought. The inyan ushmartem, then it says tishme'un, you'll hear, ushmartem, you will keep. Keeping something is the ultimate of how it'll be in terms of a ruling. That's with the mouth. And here the Rebbe explains. When you're still thinking in your thought process, when you're coming to the result and you're coming to the decision, so you see, look at it this way, look at it the other way. You have an idea, a logical reason to think maybe it's this way, maybe it's another way. There is no clear decision yet because you're thinking about it. It's not yet clarified. Which will then say one way over the other way. But then when you come to a decision, you say what the way it is, then that's kept. Because now we come to a result. The result is what comes out. It doesn't have the whole process. So the process is not yet clarified, but ushmartim, to keep it, that's speech. And then it says clearly, and you'll do it. That's the idea of a deed, action. Now, a simple way of understanding this verse is when it says, and you will keep and do, that's referring to what it says earlier in the beginning of the verse, and it will be due to the fact that you heard, of Tishme'un. So, the Hashmiya hi ha'ikir. So that means that the main part is due to the fact that you did Shmiya, you heard, and then that brought you to keep and do. So the main thing is the hearing. The inyan ushmarta vasisim bo b'derech mamela, automatically resulting in the keeping and doing. Tzorech leimar, therefore you have to say, the Tishme'un koilel ushmarta vasisim. That means that the Tishme'un, that part includes the subsequent two, the ushmarta vasisim. So the hearing has the keeping and the doing. Zeu masha mavur b'hamaimer. That's what it explains in the Maimer. Shegam machshava gufa Tishme'un. Yes, Gimel and Yonim the machshava divramaisa, that Rebbe takes it back as a few steps, like it says in the Maimer there. That in the thought process itself, Tishme'un, that you hear, Yeshtam Gimel and Yonim the machshava divramaisa. You have all three things of thought, speech, and deed. Machshava, machshava, the thought within the thought process. Then there's the next level down when it's already coming to a result. You're coming to something. The dibur machshava, the speech which is in the thought process, that level when it's already getting closer to a result, when you're figuring it out. And then the actual result that you'll come to something, the part that you could say, the part that you're actually come up with how it is, that's already the action of the thought. From this, you could say, you could speak about it, talk, so it's actual speech, and then actually do what you were talking about. And since we say the rule that the reward of a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself, the innate connection that happens with God, mitzvah, coming from connection, and the reward for the mitzvah is the content of the actual mitzvah. Therefore, it continues and explains in the verse itself, the reward of serving God with your thought, speech, and deed is and the Lord your God will keep the covenant and the kindness which he swore to your forefathers. Now, I was going to say, now this will correspond to the process, the rewards. Bris, who can neged hamaisa, the covenant, that corresponds to the action. Why? Bris, who al close Adam. Covenant is the general person. That's you keep a deal with someone. The complete person, including his actions, his deeds. Now it says, habris v'hachesed, and the kindness. What is kindness? Kindness is a feeling. You feel about somebody. It's your emotion, and therefore you do it. It brings you to an action of kindness. But it's the feeling. So v'hachesed u'chergish b'lev. So the kindness is the feeling in the heart, midas b'lev, the attributes, the emotions, and the characteristics of the heart, inyan hamachshava. So that's already has to come in your thought process. So now that we already spoke about action, we're speaking about thought here. And then that he swore, so the order is different, but you have all three of these topics. That he swore, that is speech, because literally, when one swears, they have to swear orally, verbally. The idea of hearing, that this is what it says, and it will be due to your hearing. This is also something which is told to Israel as a command, like it says in the previous parsha of Hanan, and we have to say this twice a day minimum. Shema Yisrael, Havaya Elokeinu, Havaya Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. V'zehu mashem avayir b'hamaymer shom. This is what's explained there in the Tzemach Tzedek and Alter Rebbe's Maimer. Shegam b'mashakos of Shema Yisrael, even there where it says Shema Yisrael, famous. Hine loshen Shema yesh begimon pirushim. Here, Shema, we alluded to it earlier, to hear has three explanations. Aleph, number one. Shema miloshen daber ki shemei avdecha. Shema meaning that listen. So, like it says in that verse in Samuel, speak because your servant is listening. But listening means also paying attention, focusing, concentrating. Inyan havana machshava, the idea of understanding and thinking, thought process. Beis, the second thing that Shema means, miloshen vayisham Shaul esa'om. Shaul gathered the people and he made them do and follow in the project. So, inyan asifa v'kibbutz, that means gathering together, buy-in, so to speak. Gathering, inyan hamaisa, that means to get them to do something, to bring to action. Pirish gimel amuvasham, and the third explanation, which is also brought there, shukeneged inyan hadibur, which also corresponds to the idea of speech. That may also be the idea of obeying. The hainu, in other words, bringing it out as an actual process. V'hainu the teichen klos avodah b'nei Yisrael, generally speaking, this that the children of Israel serve God. This is what's alluded to when we say hero Israel. What it says? Hero is the Lord is God, the Lord is one, right? We have to think about God, relate with God, have a relationship. What does that bring to? The next verse. The continuing part is, and you shall love the Lord your God. Love and love of God is the source of all the 248 positive mitzvahs. And for that matter, it's a positive mitzvah to fear God. So, therefore, that includes, once you say the positive mitzvahs, fear of God, which fear of God is the source of all 365 negative mitzvahs, things that you're not allowed to do. And again, the Rebbe circles back to this idea, also goes back to all three things of thought, speech, and deed. So, by our serving of God brings about that it should be the Lord, our God, the Lord is one, the one and only, and part of and parcel of everything in the world. This idea that the Lord is a God, the Lord is one, should then be drawn forth into everyone's thought process and speech and deed, into everything, all aspects of your expression in your life and the way a person is. The reason for this is specifically Israel, the ones that are commanded with this command of hear Israel, hero Israel. Why? This is a theme that the Rebbe brings a lot. Israel comes from the highest point in the thought process, in the brain, so to speak, in the intellect of God. Just like a child comes from the most pristine part of the brain of the father. In other words, they're even though the Torah is used to create the world, the Torah is what the world is for, but in the Torah it says, speak to Israel, because Israel's already there. It's part. It's that piece. So, this is the Rebbe mentioning this nuance. Therefore, Israel is higher than the three things of thought, speech, and deed. And elsewhere, it even says Tchila, by the way, that Israel was the first up in the thought process of God, and they're in the highest level. That's Israel. That's right there. When God has the earliest thought of any idea, when there's just a mixture of an emerging thought that there's going to be something, Israel's already there before there's any details. Has explained elsewhere, meaning a machshava, even higher than the whole thought process, than the immersion of the thinking about what it's going to be. And therefore the Rebbe says, therefore they're able to draw down this idea of the Lord is a God, the Lord is one, and is part of everything in thought, speech, and indeed. And he continues in the Maimer, but if this is the case, we have to understand so if we're so lofty and so high up in the intellectual process of God, how did they end up descending as souls into a physical body, Pirush? Since Israel was up so high in the thought process, first and foremost, they're even higher than the thought process. Then why did they even descend into this whole world with this nitty-gritty, with this thought, speech, and deed? And then they have to have this whole serving God, the Tishme'un of thought listening and hearkening and keeping and doing, which is thought speech and the Mevarchim, and the Rebbe explains, like the Tzemach Tzedek Alter Rebbe, the whole idea is that this dissension is for the purpose of the subsequent ascension, and how it's elevated into a higher level than what it started with, as has been discussed. Pirush. This is the point here, that the ascension that happens to the soul being on this earth and doing what God wants through Torah and mitzvahs brings the soul to a place which is higher than where they started out, which is the place that we said Olam Machshava. In that pristine thought process of God, it even gets higher, because God is infinite, and God is higher than his process of when he started to stir to create, and therefore this soul gets back to even a higher level within God himself. Because if not for this, there's no reason for it to go down for the purpose of going back up. It could have just stayed where he was. That's the soul. But it's there for a purpose of going higher. The Rebbe has said this in several Mamorim, and we've learned this. Specifically, the descension to the lower realm, and then when you're there, serving God, with thought, speech, and deed, through this, the soul ascends to the high level, to a level which is higher than even the dimensions of ascension and descension. In other words, something even higher than all of this. What does this all mean? Here's the explanation. Famously, the ultimate purpose of the creation of the world is that God lusted, the Holy One, blessed be He, wanted there to be for himself, may he be blessed, a dwelling place in the lower realm, in this place where God is so tough to find, where it looks like a place which is, heaven forbid, devoid of the idea of godliness, etc. That's where he wanted to dwell. Meaning the lowest means the lowest realm. There's nothing lower than it. Then this, the mere fact, the ability, the capability, that on this low realm, that there's nothing lower than it, should be able to be a dwelling place for God. The power for that has to come from something very lofty and very high. It comes from a very lofty place. Now that everyone goes back to that rule, that whatever is higher can then descend lower. So therefore it comes from the highest realm to penetrate this lowest level. The Yeseda Mizu, more than that, the Inyan. So now we're on the next page. The Inyan Zeh Hu Bekecha Atzmos. Where does this come from? From the essence of God. The very essence of God, where there things that are impossible. There, God could bring out godliness in this place that's seemingly devoid of any godliness, heaven forbid. The Hayesh Ha'amiti Hu Amiti Osa'inyan, the Yesh Hanivra. The true existence, which is the existence that we don't see, is really the truth of the seemingly created existence. That's the real ultimate truth of what it is. And therefore, it's the fusion and the connection of these two at the extreme, so to speak. And that's the purpose of serving God with Torah and mitzvahs in this world. It reveals within Israel how they are all one ultimately with the essence and makeup of what God is. Israel and the Holy One, blessed be He, are all one. Therefore, it's in their ability and capability to make this dwelling place in the lowest realms, because that is in the essence of God, as stated. This is the whole idea of the ascension, which is accomplished within the soul through its coming down here, through its descension. Before the soul comes down here, it's called a soul of Israel, Yisrael. That's the idea of the head. Yisrael Esis Lirosh. The word Yisrael is the same letters as unto me is the head, Li Rosh. Those letters are all included in the word Yisrael. Bechinas HaMechin, that's the idea of the intellect of God. Rosh Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the head of the Holy One, blessed be He, so to speak. Vaidei Ridosam Lamata, through the ascension to the lowest realm, and serving God in this way of hearkening and keeping and doing, which we said is the idea of thought, speech, and deed. In this low world, through this, it's revealed within themselves this fusion with the essence of God, which is higher than where his head is. It's the essence of God before the idea of creation on any level. And therefore, through Torah study, we also affect an ascension within the Torah itself. The Torah in and of itself and on its own is the idea of the intellect of God. But now, the Torah, as it descends here, and it starts to talk about the physical world and physical things, physical ideas, and therefore it's coming down here, and the Torah being studied in the lowest realm. It's not in heaven, so to speak. That like the discussions in the Talmud, that they said, well, let's hear what God says. No, it's the way it's studied here and understood here. Then the Torah is fused with the essence of God. It's almost like a boomerang. It has to come down here, and then it is united and fused with the source, with the essence of God, which is infinite in its highest level. That's the whole idea of the Torah study. For the sake of Torah study, for the sake of the Torah itself is elevated. To draw into the Torah from the source of the Torah, which is higher than it. So it's a cycle which is a continuous cycle, and we're talking about within God, which is infinite. King David, it says, used to connect the Torah in the most supernal realms with the Holy One, blessed be He, the source of Torah. And therefore, there's also he also spoke poetically about the Torah, etc., which is held in a certain sense, in a negative sense, and it's also held in a positive sense. It's not for now. In order to bond the source of the Torah with the Torah, the one that is bonding and drawing it forth has to be higher than in order to manipulate it and to be able to deal with it. So it has to be higher than the Torah, which is Yisrael. Yisrael is higher than the Torah, like we said. We're in the highest level of the thought process, that there's going to be anything. And therefore, we can manipulate. We can cause this and make it happen. That Torah bechinas chachma kanal. Torah is the intellect. But Israel reaches even higher. But in the actual essence of God, the makeup of God. But this is only revealed in them when we're here on the lowest realm, in this world, in this tough world. Through Israel being in this earth, the lowest realm, we can affect that this world, which is the Oretz, the land, it becomes the land. Like, why is it called Eretz? The word in Hebrew, Eretz, is that it wanted to do the will of its creator, and it ran. Both these words, to do the word of creator. In other words, it wanted to do it quickly. It wants to be a dwelling for the essence of God. And this affects an elevation within the Torah itself. Because God and the Torah really is one. It's the tool of God. So Now we might be thinking, well, how's this work? Israel is higher than this Torah, but Israel's already there, so to speak, and Torah is the tool, which is then the thought process of God at that level where he starts thinking after where Israel already was. And therefore we can understand why the reward for this serving God is coming to the land and taking over the land and the heritage of the land. The Eretz, Husfiris and Malchus, Oretz, the land, is the idea of the lowest sphere. They're both considered female. That they take in and give out. The Tachten Shein Tachten Lamata Mimenu B'Spheris, it's the lowest, there's no lower sphere. Over say that Hayishtalshalus in the chain of creation, Hainu Elam Asiya, that means the world of action. Oretz Alazu Tachten, this lowest world. The Av Shabbat Koyel Eretz Yisrael, even though it's of course talking about the actual land of Israel. Nevertheless, it's actually talking about the physical land of Israel in this earth, in this physical earth. Because here on the lowest realm in earth, we make the dwelling for God, as mentioned. It's not in heaven. The Khan Dafka says this is where we perform the mitzvahs through the study of Torah, etc., serving God through Torah mitzvahs. We could even add these three things of thought, speech, and deed. They also correspond to the three pillars upon which the world stands, and the three pillars that upon which the world subsides and exists. Hainu, which is of course Torah, avoiding Chassidim, and truth and justice, etc. So, and kindness. So, truth, peace, and justice, like it says in the end of the first chapter of Pirkei Avos, and Torah, and serving God, prayer, and benevolence, which is what the world stands on. The beginning. Hainu, through this process of this serving God, to make this world a dwelling place for God in the lowest realms, and all these three things, that affects within the world an everlasting, eternal existence. The kiyum nitzchi b'lishinuyim, it should be able to subside and be here forever without any changes whatsoever. Any violation you see, the source, the root of this is that it is God. God has no change. God is essence. It doesn't change. I am God and I haven't changed. Like it says in Malachi. There is no change in the supernal realm. And since through serving God we draw down the essence of God and make a dwelling place here on the lower realm, therefore the reward for this is eternity, everlasting. The Lord your God will keep the covenant. A covenant is higher than any limitation or boundary. But take if nitzchi in a way that is everlasting, an everlasting strength without any change, as it's explained at length in the Likutei Torah of the Alter Rebbe and in the subsequent Mamorim of the other Rebbeim. Here the Rebbe is, I believe, alluding to also the idea of the process through which Chassidus teaches and the legitimacy and authenticity of everything in terms of Torah and the world through Chassidus, which the Rebbe was demonstrating here. And that's that it's forever. It didn't end. It didn't. This idea doesn't finish, but it will be forever, eternal. Holds a yuvun gama keshel in Ekev. That's where the Rebbe gets to the next piece. This we understand is the connection to the idea of the heel, the lowest realm. Shepirushe loshnak bayim. This is the idea of the heels. Kem shochos atzvus. He be'inyan hachitachten. We draw down the essence of God in the lowest realm. Remember, we said it's on the extremes. Bechinas Ekev, now in the northern level up, it's not an extreme because it's infinite. But we're talking about commensurate to how it is in the lowest extreme. So, Bechinas Ekev, that's the heel. Valderach Zebizman, then there's also a heel in time, the end of days, so to speak, the end of the exile. Kenal, as mentioned earlier, Alikus of the Mashiach that goes on the heels of Mashiach. Through our actions and our service, serving God. Throughout the time of the exile and this dissension. And especially at the time of the heels of Mashiach. It's the most dark time. Through this, specifically, we're able to reach the ascension that happens through the descension. This great ascension that comes specifically through this great descension. Like we said in the mimer of the previous week of the Nachemu Ami, that the elevation of the 15th of Av is commensurate to the descension of Tisha B'Av, and ultimately the redemption according to the exile. So this is going to come through our actions and our service, but made nowadays actually so and the truthful redemption through the coming of our righteous Mashiach speedily for us, actually so. Chaim.